Alright, so something needs to be said about the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga, and I guess I'm gonna be the one to say it. Because as it stands right now, the series is roughly 20 chapters within this spin-off sequel from the Boruto Naruto Next Generation manga, and while majority of the series has been just a roller coaster ride of epicness, from Boruto having to leave the village with Sasuke and the time skip, ultimately leading into him returning to Konoha to do battle with Code and the 10-tailed beast, to finding out about these Shinju creatures, to essentially being a fugitive of the Hidden Leaf and having to try and clear his name, all the while the entire Hidden Leaf is still looking at him as the person that killed the 7th Hokage, all the whilst they are still under the spell of the omnipotence and believing that he is not the son of the 7th Hokage Naruto Uzumaki and that Kawaki is the son of the 7th, and just a lot of confusion and ultimately chaos ensued in the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex story, which lent for it to be a very compelling, interesting, exciting, and thrilling story thus far. But I definitely would say as of late, maybe the last 2 to potentially even 3 chapters, Boruto 2 Blue Vortex has taken a different route, and ultimately it seems as though the manga is starting to, I don't want to say necessarily lose its drive, but it's definitely not doing what the manga was doing prior to this latest arc, I would say. Oh, and before we continue, if you would subscribe and hit that bell, I'd greatly appreciate it. You get more videos like this and everyone wins. Because ever since the introduction to the last Shinju creature that is essentially a clone, evil version of Shinki, it kind of seems that the manga has decided to take a different approach opposed to what it was doing prior to that. Because up until that point, Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, and one of its main edges, I would definitely say that made it stand out and made it just really exciting and interesting, was the fact that Boruto has really been driving the story. I mean, it was pretty much, again, him against the world, so to speak. And it really made you just want to continue to root for him, see him prevail, see him go through his trials and tribulations. But ultimately, it was Boruto himself that really turned things around. Ironically enough, the same character that people had gripes with throughout the predecessor series of the original Boruto series. A lot of people was like, you know, he's spoiled, comes from all this wealth and all this other stuff that he had from Naruto or whatnot. To see now that the manga morphed itself into something that, no, the same character people would label problematic, so to speak, is now the one that everybody is rooting for and dying to see on screen. It kind of made for Boruto 2 Blue Vortex to be centered truly around and ultimately be compelling because of the title character Boruto. With definitely, I want to say, a strong second to Kawaki that initially was one of the catalysts that really made the predecessor series Boruto really interesting and compelling as well. Ever since he was introduced during the Kara arc and all the Kara characters and whatnot, Kawaki was really one of the driving forces. You go to 2 Blue Vortex, it was Boruto. And I say all that to say that essentially both of them were driving forces of the manga, but in particular with 2 Blue Vortex, I would give it more to Boruto. Except ever since this arc began, it seems as though they've kind of tried to stray away from that aspect, and Boruto has not really been included in events. Kawaki has kind of just been put to the sideline. I mean, he has a couple of things going on right now in terms of him finally approaching Amado to figure out what the heck has been going on, but ultimately it's not the same scenario that we've had for over a year of chapters. Taking it even further back, one of the lessons Masashi Kishimoto understood very well about the ninjaverse that he had built all the way back in the Naruto franchise is that one of the main compelling aspects, that sort of setup and that sort of scenario of the main characters, the antagonists and protagonists, essentially having this rivalry and driving the story via focusing in on those two. Which, don't get me wrong, I understand that ultimately one of the things that the audience, the readers, the viewers criticize is the fact that even with OG Naruto, but especially in Shippuden, Kishimoto really more so focused in on Naruto and Sasuke, and slowly but surely as time went on, all of the other surrounding cast, the Konoha 11, the Rookie 9, kind of went to a little bit less of a relevant status, and it was mainly focusing in on Naruto and Sasuke. And again, a lot of people criticize that, but it's that very same criticism that ultimately lent for the series to be the massive success that Naruto was. Hate it or love it, Naruto at one given point took the entire world by storm in terms of it was the king of manga pretty much, especially in the West, the king of anime as well at a given point, prior to, of course, Dragon Ball's reemergence and the new generation of anime. Regardless, it was that scenario that was set up between those two characters that helped to make the story even more interesting, that made it more compelling, because majority of the focus that the viewer slash reader had for the story was via these characters. So you got to get all these extra layers to these characters. You got to spend more time with these characters. You got to understand these characters more, which ultimately got you more attached to these characters and made it so that they were more well-rounded and thought out, and ultimately it gave that screen time that was definitely necessary to give you an understanding, and again, make these characters feel almost larger than life. Like in Naruto, one of the times that I remember very clearly during the 4th grade Shinobi Shinobi War, where fans was like, I'm getting turned off of the manga for a bit, was during the 4th grade Shinobi War, when Naruto was removed from the story for a bit because he was hiding out and training with Killer Bee. I mean, the beginning of the 4th grade Shinobi War didn't have Naruto, and that was one of the points where a lot of people were saying, oh no, the war is starting off terrible. To this day, people will say that the war really didn't kick off until like Itachi and Nagato returned, and then ultimately that's when Naruto was inserted back into the story when he finally broke out. That was when the story actually started to get once again interesting, is when you brought back these two characters that they had their rivalry, they had their scenario, their camaraderie, all of that combined, and it made people excited and interested. And that's not to say that the other characters aren't interesting, because early on Rock Lee was fascinating, you know, how far he could go with his powers, Gaara, but slowly but surely, because of the way it was written, it went to a point of, no, these are the characters that really drove the story and made things want to move forward. And while original Boruto didn't necessarily have that aspect, which is also one of the reasons why I imagine people criticize it heavily, original Boruto really drove off of the potential of what it could be. When Kara was introduced and Kawaki, definitely Kawaki was a large part of making things more exciting, of like the mystery of who he is, what he's capable of, where his character may go. And then of course there was, you know, it's just factual, a lot of people that were really excited and still interested due to the fact of Naruto and Sasuke being heavily involved, and these are the characters that people grew up with and loved and cherished, and seeing them still on the battlefield all these years later gave them some comfort. So yes, that was a main primal factor that allowed for the Boruto manga to reach roughly 80 chapters before we went into the sequel series. But you get to 2 Blue Vortex and we go full circle all the way back to what Shippuden had, and even OG Naruto towards the end had. Naruto and Sasuke bond / rivalry between Boruto and Kawaki has been one of the main driving factors of the story thus far. Every time Boruto was in a jam, whether the Leaf finally caught up with him and were interrogating him, or he was going up against Mitsuki, or he was having secret conversations and dialogues with Shikamaru trying to clear his name, those were the aspects that really drove the manga and made people want to read more. I mean, I can speak from a fan's perspective of when everybody counted Boruto out, I was one of the people that was championing it regardless. I mean, I've covered it for so long because I was passionate about it. I don't talk about anime or manga that I'm not really interested in or excited about. And even when 2 Blue Vortex first began, seeing Boruto just come back with this whole new, not only necessarily the aesthetic of, yeah, Boruto's cooler, don't get me wrong, he looks awesome now, he's swagged out, sure, but it was just seeing, oh, everything that even people may have criticized Naruto when he came back from his original time skip going into Shippuden, they made sure to cover all bases with Boruto. He came back, not only is he just a little bit wiser, this dude is him. Everything that he learned, whether it be from his initial training of the first year that he had, or the following 2 years that he had of working with Kashin Koji and learning all of these techniques that he wouldn't learn for decades to come, it really lent for this character to be a lot more well-rounded, and it felt more believable of a time skip. He wasn't just going on adventures and spending time with a father figure. He was really learning, mastering himself, mastering what it truly means to be a shinobi, because that was one of the most primal factors of what Naruto all those years ago really began, right? It's a story about ninja and what it means to be a shinobi. Even the Boruto Naruto the movie stuff, one of the main factors aligned very specifically that Sasuke had was the soul of a shinobi never changes, and essentially Boruto embodies kind of the soul more so of his master. He always will love Naruto, you know, obviously as his dad, but his master is ultimately what he has embodied and ultimately became. And I think that's another factor that lent for throughout the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga. Boruto being more like Sasuke is almost as if you get the best of both worlds. Like, he's still similar to his dad, but he's more so a lot more embodying the spirit and the epicness that is Sasuke. And I say all that to say the last arc or so of the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga has started to lose my interest. And I know before people started attacking me, oh my god, how could you say that? Boruto 2 Blue Vortex is great. 2 or 3 months ago you actually were praising it. How could you go this route? Well, first of all, 2 or 3 monthly chapters of a monthly manga can do a lot. Second of all, even before the last few months, honestly, again, ever since the Shinki clone was introduced into the story, it felt as though they were trying to navigate away from what made this manga really exciting month to month since it began. And it's pretty much been outright up front with it, and that's sidelining Boruto. I mean, ever since Kashin Koji even told him, if you get involved in this battle right now, some bad stuff is gonna happen. You have to sit this one out. And then likewise with Kawaki, even though they're still trying to keep him somewhat based into the story with the whole Amado plotline that essentially Boruto set up when he gave Kawaki the information that Amado was manipulating his body. But even then, it's still not the same. Like, we had a really great moment not that long ago where Boruto and Kawaki met up and Boruto gave him that information, and And yeah, since those times, it's just been slowly but surely going into a different direction that doesn't have that same impact that the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga had initially. I mean, even the sales are kind of doing very well for the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga for those volumes that showcased a lot of the epicness and greatness of what the story was initially presenting itself as. And that's essentially this lone warrior with this rivalry and trying to escape and evade, and all of that really epic storytelling kind of got sidelined for what's been transpiring recently. And I don't know if that's due to the fact of the authors taking into consideration, because at the end of the day, yes, the fans do have a vocal stance and they can present criticisms, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be the main motivating factor. I want to say that potentially it's because of Boruto moving the plot too quickly. It kind of went like, okay, I gotta imagine the authors were at a certain point, where do we go from here? Because for the very same reasons that we love Boruto since he's returned in the 2 Blue Vortex story, and how strong he's become, how epic he's become, how wise, just everything about his growth, is also the fact that sometimes it almost feels like homie could end the story any chapter now. And while we don't want necessarily for the story to be prolonged, there's a certain rhythm and flow that has to go with these things, to where it has to be believable. It can't just be that Boruto comes in and shuts it all down. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's that warning that was set up chapters ago that essentially Jura can take out Boruto and he's, you know, one you can't mess with or whatnot. But even then, it almost feels as though it was like a convenient plot thread of, there's this creature that now even Boruto can't mess with, despite the fact that he just came back and showed that the threat that they previously labeled as like, no, you can't mess with him, code, was made to be more like, well, not the threat that we initially thought he would be. And then let's not forget also the fact that, again, Boruto has Kashin Koji coaching him, giving him advice on how to navigate through all of these situations, which lends to the reason why Boruto has been sidelined to begin with. But again, those are all author choices. Those are narrative choices on how to maneuver, opposed to the story could have instantly gone into Boruto goes straight to war. He grabs all the other Kage from the different villages. They listen to him. They understand what's really happening, and boom. But again, the story would end fairly quickly, because they've done a great job at making Boruto a shinobi god and can't be messed with. Again, one of the main factors being, let's not forget that it was said that Code without his limiters would be on a level of essentially Jigen. Rewind back to those points, Naruto and Sasuke, they struggled and got their heads busted via Jigen. Therefore, if homie is at that level and Boruto comes back and essentially makes extreme ease work of homie, that would mean that Boruto has ascended beyond the levels of Naruto and Sasuke, minus the wisdom and of course the experience, which are very much so crucial, and we cannot downplay that by any means. Strictly speaking, in terms of what the narrative has set forth, it makes it seem as though Boruto is extremely powerful and could put an end to a lot of these problems very quickly. I mean, to be honest with you, one of the major things was, hey, he left after Kawaki pulled the wool over his eyes and made everybody look at him as this demon villain that potentially killed the 7th Hokage and all of these horrible things that was put on him. And when he returned, at any given point up till now, he could have busted Kawaki's head and ended it all. Like, legitimately, if it wasn't for Boruto's self-control and ultimately having to navigate through the visions that Kashin Koji has given him, Boruto more than likely could have finished everything to begin with. But it's to the fact that he kind of might need Kawaki in order to take down the threat that is Jura. Which I just had a crazy thought, because at the end of the day, if the artificial being known as Kashin Koji was created by Amado, I'm curious how much of that futuristic viewpoint is, well, his own and not basically from the viewpoint of Amado. Just throwing a little fan theories in there, that's all. And so it gets to a point where it's kind of like, alright, where do we go from here moving forward, as far as for it to get back on course to that feeling? Because Boruto made in such a short amount of time, pretty much roughly the first year of the 2 Blue Vortex manga, he kind of was doing a pretty good job at clearing his name. I mean, if the entire Hidden Leaf Village's leader, the Hokage, Shikamaru, essentially is on board with, no, dude is really not guilty, he is actually innocent and they're doing him wrong, and working within the shadows in the back, so to speak, dealings to help him navigate and get through, then that means that, again, it could very well be that not much long after that, Boruto could be in the clear to even not be looked at as the bad guy that did anything wrong in the Hidden Leaf. Although we do have the thorn in our side, that is the omnipotence that Ada had set forth. Although, to be fair, the omnipotence has to stop at one given point, right? So it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that Kashin Koji himself would have some sort of understanding of the future on how omnipotence gets defeated to begin with. It honestly seems as though, going according to Kashin Koji's plan, stands is the best course of action, but in doing so, it removes some of the most exciting aspects of the Two Blue Vortex story, and that's Boruto himself and his struggle with the Hidden Leaf and all of these forces that are coming after him. So again, it takes me all the way back to OG Naruto and the criticisms that Kishimoto faced, where people said, you sidelined everybody for Naruto and Sasuke, but it was for those same very reasons why a lot of people loved all of those classic moments we got with Naruto and Sasuke, and why the manga became the legendary and iconic series that it ultimately established itself to be. And I think Two Blue Vortex still 150% has the potential to do so, but it needs to kind of maneuver towards maybe not necessarily identically what it was doing, because that necessarily wasn't jumping off the pages of success that ideally I'd imagine Shueisha would like for it to be. But ultimately, I think it was the best path to success and the best path to a really interesting and exciting story where it was going before they kind of sidelined Boruto, had him sitting there with Kashin Koji, and let the other characters take over, which, don't get me wrong, Sarada and Mitsuki are pretty interesting characters as well. I mean, the Boruto manga and series itself started with the new Team 7, Boruto, Sarada, and Mitsuki, but ultimately, even Sarada herself kind of shines more when she's next to Boruto. And while Sarada is 150% worth more than just moments like that, and she definitely is a great character in and of herself, I don't know, it just seems like removing Boruto and even Kawaki to a certain degree from the plot and making the story move forward has not been the best choice. But then again, I'm speaking from the perspective of a fan that really enjoys this story and really wants to see it succeed. And I say all that with hoping within the next few chapters we could kind of come to a close with this arc of the, you know, Shinki clone and the Moegi clone, finish that ordeal, because we already see where it's going as far as the Konohamaru situation. And I'll just be honest with you, the treatment of Konohamaru and the Boruto manga, especially even now in Two Blue Vortex, where fans had extremely high hopes that they would finally turn it around for him, and how he's treated within the confines of this series, really is off-putting and makes me, myself, as a fan of this franchise, going all the way back to the Naruto days, not want to continue on with it. And I personally think that with this Matsuri situation, Konohamaru deserves a win and should get the win. If Konohamaru is defeated yet again by this Matsuri character, it just feels as though at that point, I don't want to say bad writing, but it just feels wrong. Like, he's the sensei and he's supposed to be playing that role, and if he's the sensei role, essentially like the Kakashi, while Kakashi wasn't invincible, so to speak, Kakashi ultimately took a lot of battles and really made sure that they won. I mean, even going to Shippuden Kakuzu, the final battles against Kaguya, Kakashi always stood his ground, and Konohamaru was supposed to kind of play that role, and it just seems as though they try their best to do anything they can to not let him stand up and grab the mantle of Kakashi when he very much so should get it. I mean, at this particular point in the story, he's even the right hand to the Hokage and potentially next up to take the throne. So if essentially that's the route he's supposed to take, the losses that he's been taking throughout this story definitely needs to start turning things around. There needs to be a level of balance. Now again, I'm speaking strictly from the standpoint of a fan, but I'll even add into there as a critic as well. It's like, well, what's the point of including Konohamaru if you're constantly gonna have him have situations like that? It just feels disrespectful to the character. I will say some of the positives, I am grateful that again they're keeping Mitsuki and Sarada in the fold of things, and it seems as though Sarada potentially might get more upgrades with her Sharingan, and it takes me back to OG Boruto where they did give Sarada a few of her moments, like during the Boro fight she kind of got some upgrades. So it seems as though this could be good potential for Sarada's character development and her power-ups, likewise with Mitsuki. But even the fact that we're this deep into the video and I haven't even really touched up on the ninja from the other villages that are involved, Yodo and the other character, I feel like it's supposed to be all of the right moves. Like everything that they're doing with Two Blue Vortex on paper sounds like, yes, this is a way you go. You know, you expand the cast outside of the main MCs. You're supposed to give all of the side characters something to do. But definitely let me know what you think. How do you feel about the Boruto Two Blue Vortex manga thus far? How do you feel about this arc? How do you feel about the whole situation with Ryu and Matsuri? Do you think that this battle is going to go well for Konohamaru? And your expectations overall for the manga as a whole? Yeah.